Would you mind if I ask, what form of addiction was it that you struggled with?
A drug addiction. I would often find myself going back to crack cocaine, but when I reflect back on it, I actually see that my addiction was spread over other things as well. For example, if I was drinking, if I went out for some beers, for example, I would often drink more than I set out to. If I was out clubbing and I was taking pills, I would often take more pills than I planned to. And quite often I would end up, at the end of the night, going out seeking more.
And how did that addiction impact on your life, and how did that carry forward into your friends, family and your work life as well?
I think it's interesting. I was speaking to my mum when I was away with her for her birthday, and she described me as like a functioning addict. And I think I always kept it away from my family, but from my family looking in, I was always working. But the reality of it was, what would happen was I would build up my life, so I'd get a job, get somewhere to stay, and then my using would just get out of control. And then everything that I built up would crash in around me. But I was very good at starting again. So to somebody looking in, I seemed to be okay. That's how it started out. And then as it progressed further on, my friends started to sort of leave my life. And I'd sort out people that used like me, so they wouldn't judge me. My family, I didn't want to be sort of connected to them so much because I always felt that they were more interested than I was prepared to tell them about. So I ended up isolating myself. Even though I was working and I appeared to be functioning, I wasn't. It was just getting worse and worse. So, you know, the jobs would come and go, the friends started to thin out, there was a distance that I was putting in between my close family because I didn't want them to know exactly what was going on. So it was going downhill, but I was the last person to sort of see that. You know, I was trying to convince myself that I'm still working, everything's all right. But everyone around me just drifted out of my life. So the evidence was there, but I didn't have the sort of eyes to see it. I think those around me did.
So at some point you must have reached the point where you're going to rehab. You decided to make that choice. Was it yourself that made that choice, and how did you go about choosing Broadway Lodge as the right place for you to get help?
Okay, I had one session that was really quite dark, and I ended the session and I started to self-harm, and I called my mum. You know, my mum is, I never really knew my dad. My mum's been the rock in my life, and so I called her up and she came round and she saw the mess and she said, right, we need to take you to the doctors. So I went to see the doctor and I said to the doctor, look, I'm only here because my mum's outside and she's on my case. I don't need any help. And he just looked at me and he said, I think you need some help. So he referred me to a unit in Sheffield. I don't know what it's called, but they were responsible for getting funding for a treatment centre. And I was also engaging in a 12-step fellowship at the time. And one of the senior people, when I say senior, with a couple of years clean time, I said to him about this, and he said, there's a treatment centre that a guy that I was working with, a sponsor of mine, he was sent to Broadway Lodge. He's the only person that's been from our vicinity. If you can get in there, because it's a really good treatment centre. And eventually I got funding for Broadway Lodge, which was incredible.
And when you got there, what did you feel about the detox and the therapy processes that they offer you, and how did you cope with those?
Well, when I got to Broadway Lodge, I was 3 months clean. I'd engaged with a totally different fellowship. I was going to one fellowship in Sheffield. I tried a different one in Manchester, and something resonated with me about the fellowship there, and it hooked me in, and I was able to stay clean. I didn't address any of the issues that were leading to my using, but I was able to stay clean. So there was no detox for me when I was at Broadway Lodge. The counselling and the therapy, it was scary. Opening up and trusting people enough to sort of risk something that I, open myself and be vulnerable, scared me to death. Really, really scared me to death. But that guy that told me about Broadway Lodge before I went to Broadway Lodge, he said to me, Barclay, when you get to Broadway Lodge, you've got to give it everything. And when you're in groups, you've got to engage. And it really planted a seed in my mind. So I really, even though I was afraid, I understood that the people in the room, even though sometimes when it felt like they were interrogating me, not just the counsellor, the other group members, I understood that they were trying to love me better. They were trying to sort of help me to help myself. It was phenomenal. That process is what it's all about for me, Broadway Lodge.
And you mentioned just now the fellowship and the 12-step programme. How did you find engaging with that? Did you find that difficult, or did you find that quite easy?
I first engaged with the 12 steps in 2000, and I think I got about 2001, about 90 days clean, and I fully identified with being an addict, and then my life changed and I just disengaged. And for about the next 5 years, I forgot that I was an addict, carried on using, Everything that I'd experienced in that first engagement with the 12 steps had just fallen into the back of my mind. So when I went again in 2008, I was familiar with it, and I didn't have any problem with the steps, but I wasn't really working them. I think what it was, I was so fed up with feeling fed up, with doing the same thing, that there was like a window had opened in me, and the 12 steps actually spoke to me. So when I went to Broadway Lodge, I was switched on and I was ready for it. So it didn't worry me. The words in the steps didn't worry me. For example, it mentions God and higher power. For me, God was good orderly direction, or group of druggies, or in a broader sense, this group of people. Mm. And I learned to trust that group, and that group was the reason I didn't go back to Sheffield, because I gave them the decision of where to go when I left Broadway Lodge, and God, I'm so grateful that they made a decision for me to go to Bristol. But the 12 steps it's just a great formula for recovery and for continuing to maintain your recovery after Broadway Lodge.
And what do you feel about the level of care and support that you received while you were at Broadway Lodge and afterwards?
Fundamental to my recovery. They allowed me to get to the core of who I was, and then start to build around that core, so I could go back out into the world, not totally vulnerable, an appropriate sort of, how can I describe it? Protection, a sensible level of protection, to protect myself. That was down to the counsellors, the support, all of the staff, and the other residents. That's what makes Broadway Lodge so different and so key to where I am today. It's just incredible. I feel emotional when I think about that, because it's that's what makes Broadway Lodge special.
And I'm pleased to say you're obviously many years on from that day and from that time now. And how has life been for you since leaving Broadway Lodge? How have things changed for you?
Well, I got a job, because you were encouraged to sort of do charity work or work in charity shops. So I did that for a while, and then I got a job for 2 years, just working 2 days a week. That allowed me to go to university to study to be a counsellor. All the time I was engaging with 12 steps. I did a fellowship in Bristol, and life, I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but from the moment I left Broadway Lodge, life just continued to build and improve. All because I believed it was good, orderly direction. I was making the next right choice, stuff that I'd never done before, lessons that I was taught in Broadway Lodge. And I'm here today, really grateful for what I have in my life and for the experience I had at Broadway Lodge.
Which brings me very nicely on to asking you what you would like to say to the staff, the volunteers, anybody that helps and supports Broadway Lodge. What would you like to say to them?
Thank you, firstly. You know, to me, I could group all of the people together, and what they are is far more than the sum of their parts. In that building, in that place, on that premises, they're all, the work they do is just phenomenal. You know, words fail me what I could say. I'm just so grateful, and they are fundamental to where I am today. It's really burns deeply in my heart what I feel for them.